So in this video, what I want to do is I want to talk about three different subjects that I think are somewhat related insofar as they're all kind of thought-terminating cliches in a way. So first off is this concept of sane washing. Sane washing is a term that has gained popularity, I think mostly amongst liberals, in like the last year or two. I've only started to hear it lately. Maybe it's been around before then, but I've only really started to hear it recently. The basic concept behind sane washing is that there are certain ideas that are just wacky and irrational. Like, let's say, that I believe that, I truly believe that all of our politicians are reptiles, right? I believe in the reptilians theory. I believe that our politicians are reptile aliens from outer space, right? And then I go and I express that on the internet. And then somebody else goes, well, I think what he's saying is that in a sort of a metaphorical sense, our politicians are cold-blooded and reptile-like, right? And then other people start going, I think you're sane washing this guy. I think you're sane washing him. You're making him sound more sane and more reasonable than he really is. He's just saying our government is controlled by reptiles. To some extent, I think this is a valuable kind of an idea. I think maybe this could be a good thing to have. In a different culture and in a different environment, this could be a useful concept to have in our back pocket. To be able to be like, yeah, no, I think you're giving this person too much credit. I think you're treating them as more sane than they actually are. Because sometimes people do believe things for very irrational reasons. And sometimes it's hard, if you're a rational person, and I'd like to think I am, that it's hard to believe that they believe it whole cloth, that they believe it fully, and that they just believe all this irrational stuff. Sometimes it's easier to think that they believe a more charitable interpretation of what they're saying. There's this great moment with Kanye West talking to Alex Jones that I really love. I think this is a great example of sane washing, by the way, where Kanye West is talking to Alex Jones and he's like, I love Hitler, I'm a Christian and, I love everybody and I love Hitler. I love Hitler. Love him, love him, love him, love him, right? So he's saying he loves Hitler. And any normal person would be like, no, fuck that, man. Don't love Hitler, right? But then Alex Jones is trying to play the defensive. He's trying to be like, these liberals are overreacting to this Kanye West guy. These woke liberals getting all offended, right? So he's like, so it sounds like what you're saying is that you're a Christian. And, you love Hitler because you love everybody, as Christ would have. Christ loves everyone. And Kanye West responds, well, yeah, I do, but there's a lot that I like about Hitler, too. Like, he starts saying, no, there's a lot that I like about Hitler. He starts clarifying. Like, no. Don't take me out of context. I'm saying what I sound like I'm saying. He's like, don't water down what I'm saying by making it like a broad Christian statement of like, God loves everyone, no matter how hateful or evil they are. He's like, no, I'm saying I also kind of just like Hitler, right? And Alex Jones is like, oh, come on, man, work with me here. I'm trying to do some PR boost for you. I'm trying to, sanitize your image a little bit. Just help me out. Just work with me a little bit here, man. So I think maybe that's a good example of someone sane washing in an embarrassing context. But I also think this concept of sane washing could be really dangerous in our current political environment, right? I have a feeling that I'm going to get accused of sane washing quite a bit in the near future, right? Because we live in an environment of no compromise. We live in an environment of if you show weakness, you're on their side. It's us or them. We live in a very partisan, very hateful political environment right now. And in that environment, having a term like sane washing can be really dangerous, because anyone trying to see the other side, or to not completely dismiss their political opponents, to not completely ignore them, anyone trying to even steelman their opponent's arguments, which is a valuable tool of critical thinking. If you want to grow and develop as a person, if you want to become a critical thinker, you have to steelman your opponent's arguments. You have to do that. You have to not just to give credit to your opponents, but even if you just want to make your own arguments better and more effective, you have to ask, what does your audience really believe? And if you're trying to change people's minds, then you have to steelman your opponent's arguments so that you know what they're really saying and what's really important to them, so that you can target what's really important to them when trying to reach them and trying to change their mind. So I think there's a real danger that steelmanning somebody's arguments, is just going to become sane washing a bad person. And so we're going to end up with a culture actively encouraging people to treat their political opponents as straw men more instead of less, which is the exact opposite of the direction we need to be going as a society right now. The second concept is a lot less new, a lot more tried and true. It's the concept of privilege. So a lot of people don't know the history of this. I believe the origins of the concept of white privilege come from this essay, White Privilege Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. Could be wrong about that. I'm not a historian of this subject or anything like that. If that's not the first instance of white privilege, then it's certainly a pretty influential essay. So I'm going to be going off of that for the purpose of this discussion. It lists a series of things that the author believes that the average white person can generally expect to be the case throughout their life, on the basis of their race. And most of this stuff, it's very important to note, is negative things that white people can expect won't happen to them, that they might not be super consciously aware of, because they're things that aren't happening. So this is about white space. I don't mean white racially. I mean, this is about negative space. This is about what's not happening. And this is important because one of the lines of argumentation that I hear on the right that is just very mistaken and misguided is people will say, oh, you think I have white privilege? You don't know my life. You know, I grew up poor. You know, my life was terrible. I ended up in prison. I got shot by a cop or something. I don't know. But terrible things happened to this person in their life. And they happen to be white. And that's not really the argument here, right? The argument isn't that every white person is privileged, or that their life is gonna be better because they're white. At least not in the best, most concrete form of the argument. Maybe that's the argument some people on the internet are making, but that's not the argument that Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack is making. And I take that essay much more seriously than I take somebody on Twitter, right? So in the most concrete, most steelman form of the argument, I think privilege is a very legitimate concern and a very legitimate concept. I think it's very useful almost as an epistemological concept, meaning like a concept in like how we think about thinking. I think it's a useful concept because it gets at ignorance. It gets at where ignorance comes from and how somebody can be kind of passively unaware of a concept or an idea because it might not immediately affect them. I like this idea. I really do. I think there's a lot in the concept of white privilege that is worth keeping, that is worth keeping around, worth acknowledging. I think the problem is now it's popular and it's well known and it's on the internet, and it started to be used as kind of an attack, kind of being used as an attack by a lot of people. I would describe it as kind of an ad hominem fallacy. If you don't know, in debate bro terms, an ad hominem fallacy is when you start criticizing someone on the basis of their relevance to the subject, their knowledge, their expertise. So if somebody gives you medical advice and says, I think you should be vaccinated, I think vaccination has been shown to be effective, I think it's been shown to be better than not being vaccinated. Like if you're concerned about the risks, there are also risks to not being vaccinated, and they make a good argument. They make a strong case. And then you respond, what are you, a doctor? You're not a doctor, so why should you have an opinion? I made a video about this in the past called Deterritorialization and Gatekeeping, in which I basically argued that everybody should be allowed to have positions on everything. I don't think you should have to be an expert or have like perfect knowledge of a subject in order to be able to say something about it. Similarly, I don't think you should have to be a person of color in order to have opinions on race necessarily at all times, right? And so I think a lot of times the concept of privilege gets used as an ad hominem attack. Rather than talking about someone's ideas, which is the alternative to an ad hominem attack, you're talking about their race or their background. So instead of saying, hey, you know, I disagree with you about like a colorblind approach to race. I personally advocate a pretty colorblind approach to race, which is maybe a bit controversial on the left. Right? Instead of saying, hey, I personally disagree with you that we should have a colorblind approach to race, and here's why, and you start making, you know, sort of arguments about why a colorblind approach is insufficient to confronting white supremacy or something along those lines, right? Instead of attacking the idea itself, you start attacking the person. You say, oh, well, you only believe in a colorblind approach to race because you're white and that's your privilege showing. So, you know, maybe you should think about that. That's not a good way to talk to people. That's not a good way to argue with people because there's nothing you can do about that in a conversation. That's the problem, is if somebody tells you, for any reason, anyone at any time tells you for any reason that your opinion is privileged, you can't undo that. You can't change your background. You can't change who you are. You can't change where you're from or your race or your identity. That's nothing you can change about yourself. You can change your mind. You can change how you think, and if you are truly ignorant about something, then maybe through the power of conversation, they can change your mind and make you less ignorant about that thing. You know, this idea that there's this fundamental life experience that is ungatherable by anybody who is outside of the given group, I just don't think is true. And that's my reason for generally supporting this more non-expert approach to conversation and engagement. So yeah, I think privilege is a useful concept. I think it's useful for pointing out the ways in which people in privileged positions can be ignorant of some of the problems that people who aren't in those positions can experience. But I don't think it should be used as an attack in conversations. The last concept is the concept of a pick-me. This is usually thrown around by liberals, talking about like conservative black people, or conservative women, or conservative trans people, conservative gay people. Basically, if you're conservative and you're not a straight white cisgender man, at some point you will be called a pick-me by someone. That's the way things have gone here. And the idea here is that no one could possibly arrive at a conservative opinion about any of these issues of their own volition, in their own mind, and in their own thoughts. So they must be doing it either consciously or subconsciously in order to impress the dominant group so that they can make money, or so that they can get safety of some kind, right? So maybe you're a gay person and you believe some transphobic things, and you believe those things so that cis people, straight people will think, oh, you're one of the good ones. I can totally see that happening some of the time, maybe, right? And so I can totally see the discomfort with this potential, the potential for that to happen. Because, it probably is the case that you try to get on people's good side sometime. And it is very frustrating, I think, that some people will deliberately play into this. I know some people who will be like, they're one of the good gays, not one of the crazy, I'm going to change my gender people. And I don't agree with that. So it is kind of a problem that I guess you could say dominant groups, white people, straight people, etc., place minorities into these boxes where there's like, there's the good ones, and then there's the crazy minorities, right? And you got to be one of the good ones if you want them to like you. They're like, oh no, I'm not homophobic. I like the good gays, not the bad, crazy gays. I think a lot of that has to do with just an outsized impression of how bad the crazy gays are, which usually comes from the internet or media or TV. I don't think most people go out in the real world and see gay people having a party at Pride, for example, and their immediate thought is like, "Ooh, those gays are gross. I gotta hang out with the good, prim and proper gays." I think that comes from kind of cherry-picked extreme examples of things happening. Maybe somebody wore a diaper and then shit their diaper or something at a Pride event, and that's obviously a gross negative experience. That's the thing in general about having political conversations in the modern world, is that it's always easier these days to find the worst possible version of the person you're criticizing, because there's a global reach now. There's a global reach. So you can find somebody out in like Tennessee behaving in the worst way. I like to say that you can never say, well, nobody says that anymore. Like, you can't say, well, nobody actually thinks that, because someone does. Someone somewhere thinks whatever crazy unhinged thing you're saying nobody in your group thinks. And these days, thanks to the internet, whoever that person is that actually thinks it, is going to have an amplified voice, and they're going to be able to be plucked out of the ether and cherry-picked as an example. But in general, I don't really put a lot of stock into this concept of a pick-me, because I think people fail to realize how powerful our own internal reasoning skills are. For the most part in my life, whenever I've had an opinion that was maybe problematic or not woke or what have you, it wasn't because I was subconsciously trying to play up to some majority group, right? It wasn't like I was trying to appeal to someone else's opinion of me or fit in some way. No, it was because I happened to sit with the idea in my head for a little bit, and I came to a different conclusion from the people around me. I don't think that, for example, let's say Blair White. This is a great example of someone who gets called a pick-me a lot. Trans YouTuber Blair White. I don't think that Blair White is a pick-me. I don't. Personally. I think that she is a person who happens to be a trans woman, who maybe looked around her and saw some cherry-picked examples of maybe some crazy non-binary people, and she went, I don't like being associated with that. And she started to worry about what was going to happen if public opinion turned against her because of those crazy examples of people. And she started to think, well, I need to kind of protect myself. And in order to protect myself, I need to ostracize the more insane groups within my community in order to protect myself from the bad impression that they give. And she wanted to become kind of a mouthpiece for that. And then with time, I think maybe she got a little bit, brand captured or audience captured, and she started to lean into it a little bit more heavily. And what could have been just a stray critique here and there of some random non-binary person using pronouns that are maybe a little bit too niche for the general population, became a career. And when it becomes your career, you got to lean into it a lot harder. So I think that happened to a lot of these people, and I think a lot of these people did sort of slowly go off a deep end at some point. I think Candace Owens, this is a black woman who might also be called a pick-me, kind of went off the deep end. And so she mostly talks about the Jews now, right? Like she's like talking about Jews and Hollywood. That's pretty off the deep end, I think. So yeah, I think that you can get to a much darker place from your own reasoning and your own head and the types of people you surround yourself with. And I don't think it's at all necessary to assume that there's some external force acting on these people's subconscious, that they're trying to be pick-me's, quote unquote. And if you assume that people are pick-me's, then you assume they kind of can't be reasoned with because they don't believe what they're saying. They just want to be safe. They just want to be in the shining light of all the straight white people, right? And they want to be safe from the straight white people. So they're saying what they think the straight white people want to hear. And if you believe that, then you preclude the possibility of talking to someone who believes something different from you and changing their mind. And you also ostracize anyone who has any position that is even marginally different from the left-wing sort of socially liberal status quo from expressing that and maybe having their mind changed. Because now the moment they express that, they're called a pick-me and then pushed to the right. Because that's what we do on the left. We push people out and then the right welcomes them with open arms. That's wonderful. I'm so fucking glad that we keep doing that.